Oh, it's so nice to see so many faces. I've missed you all. Ooh, suddenly I'm in speaker view. Now I can't see your faces as big. I'd rather see yours than mine.
Sorry, I can remove that.
No, that's good. You can leave it for everybody else. I can change it on my end.
Okay. I'll do a quick intro as people are kind of joining us. My name is Anna Brulette, and I am with Building Great Futures, and I'm serving as the tech host for this session. So just want to pop in and quickly say, please remember to stay on mute while folks are presenting until we kind of open things up for discussion and questions. And if anyone has issues, please, feel free to chat to me. There's also information in the chat about getting in touch with Leslie if you're having kind of broader issues in the app or whatever it may be. So I'm going to turn it over and I'm going to try to pin all of our presenters here so everyone can see them. Welcome.
So fancy, Anna. Thank you. Would you mind dropping the support thing in the chat one more time, Anna? Because some folks joined, I think, after you had put it in.
Absolutely.
Hi, everyone. We're so happy to have you all here. I'm so excited to see your faces, and I'm looking forward to next year when hopefully I'll see you all in 3 dimensions. But it is great to have you here. So we are going to spend some time. Taking myself off speaker again so I can see all of you. We're going to spend some time this morning talking about the early childhood education transformation component of the Alliance's legislative agenda. And with me, so I'm Sarah Kenney. Hi, everyone. I am the Chief Policy Officer here at Let's Grow Kids, and our legislative agenda has been developed in partnership with Vermont Association for the Education of Young Children. And Janet McLaughlin is here somewhere, who is going to be co-presenting with us. And then also joining me are Drake Turner and Ben Horwitz from Let's Grow Kids. Oh, there's Janet pinned at the top. Hello. So we'll introduce ourselves as we go. So I'm going to be kicking us off here, and then Drake's going to talk a little bit, and then Janet, and then Jen's going to support us with some questions and answers. And the way we've structured this is we'll all be together for the first about 20 minutes or so. Talking about updates from the legislation that we passed last year and the legislative agenda that we're working through this year. And then we're going to break out into small groups, into 4 breakout rooms, so that you can work through your lunch table remarks and get ready with your talking points for lunch when you'll be with legislators and can ask them to support our legislative agenda this year. So I am really excited to be here with you all today. I'm actually in our Montpelier office, and we'll be going over to the Capitol Plaza in person without all of you. You'll all be on screens, but I'm going to help get legislators situated over there later today. So I'm excited to get to watch you all work your magic and see the legislators super energized in their conversations with you all. So welcome to 2022. I keep trying to add 20s because I feel like we've lived 20 years in the past 2. Early Childhood Day at the legislature. So, and I think Jen's going to be advancing slides for me here. So we're going to start out by talking a little bit sort of big picture. So if we can advance, that's awesome. Thanks, Jen. This is not news to any of you here today. We know that we have a childcare crisis in Vermont, and you are all living it every day. We know that 3 out of 5 of Vermont's youngest children don't have access to the childcare they need. We know that Vermont families are spending up to 30% of their annual income, even with childcare financial assistance, on childcare. And we know that in a recent national survey, 71% of center-based childcare programs in Vermont said they were experiencing staffing shortages. So the crisis is acute and it's very present. And we all worked together last year to pass some landmark legislation that is slowly moving forward. And then we have a legislative agenda this year that keeps some of those components moving forward, and that seeks to address the emergency workforce shortage needs in early childhood education in Vermont. So let's go to the next slide here, and we'll talk a little bit about our big picture solution for childcare that we embarked on last year together. We know that the answer to all of those problems we just laid out is a childcare system that is accessible to all Vermont families, that's equitable, that's affordable, that's high quality, that's accountable, and that is sustainable. So we have been working together with all of you and many, many other people all around the state over the past few years to develop the design for that system and to build the public will to move forward with significant state investments that will achieve all of those goals that we have for our early childhood education system. So let's move to the next slide and talk a little bit about H171, which is now Act 45, which when I think back to a year ago at Early Childhood Day at the legislature, it was like, it was a dream, and now it's reality. So H171, as you'll recall, is the bill that we worked on last year, and it had many different components to it. And key to that bill is that the legislature established in that bill 2 goals for our future childcare system in Vermont. The first is that Vermont families spend no more than 10% of their annual income on childcare. And the second is that Vermont early childhood educators are well compensated and well supported, on par with their colleagues in similarly credentialed professions. So those are the twin goals that were set by H171. And then in accompanying that were a whole bunch of policy components. So let's move to the next slide and we'll talk through some of those. So, and we're going to talk through what was in the bill that passed last year and also an update on where things are at. So, as you will recall, H171 made progress on family affordability, and that was principally through the Child Care Financial Assistance Program. And that the bill made changes to CCFAP, as we call it, that would expand the program, expand eligibility for the program to families. Currently, it's capped families who are at 300% of the federal poverty level. It would expand to 350% of the federal poverty level. It switches to a per family copay model instead of per child, and would increase the rates paid in the Child Care Financial Assistance program. So those would be really important new changes to CCFAP. The second component of H171 was modernizing our IT system. As you have likely all experienced, the current Bright Futures information system is held together, as the commissioner said in testimony last year, with twigs and duct tape, has some significant challenges and needs to be replaced. And so the funding was allocated last year to replace that IT system. Unfortunately, the implementation of the new IT system has been delayed. The original very optimistic timeline was for October 1st last year. We now know that CDD has put out information recently that the new timeline will be July 3rd of this year. And in the meantime, all of those changes that we just outlined to CCFAP that passed in H171 can't go into effect until the new IT system is in place. So the implementation of all that expansion is delayed until July 3rd. And then on July 3rd of this year, all of those pieces will take effect. In the meantime, you all have likely received in the last couple of weeks notice from the Child Development Division that they are putting into place a temporary 20% rate increase in CCFAP to try to make some progress while we're waiting for the new IT system to go into effect. So that's the update on those pieces. Really exciting expansion in CCFAP, and the implementation is slightly delayed, which is really hard, I know, for lots of programs and for families who are really counting on this expansion. So we do have a date now where we're anticipating July 3rd that will all go into effect. Another piece of H171 was the workforce stabilization components, and those included new scholarships, funding for expansion of existing scholarships that happen through the TEACH program right now, and also a new student loan repayment support program for early childhood educators. So the TEACH program was already up and running, so the funding to expand that is already flowing out. Vermont Association for the Education, Vermont Association for the Education of Young Children is running that program, and so they have already started moving those additional dollars. A program of new scholarships for early childhood educators is going to be administered by VTAEYC, the Vermont Student Assistance Corporation, and that will be up and running in the next few months, I believe. And then the student loan repayment support program is also going to be administered by Vermont AEYC. They were just given the contract and they are racing to get that program set up. And so those funds will be flowing out to folks who are currently working in childcare programs who have student loan debt, who will be getting support from that program in the next couple months. So, we passed all this legislation last year, and some of it is taking quite a while to implement because these kind of big changes take some time to run through all of the legislative process, the administrative process, get out to the folks who are actually going to be implementing them in the field. And then the final piece of H171 was two really important studies. And we don't usually think of studies as being like the centerpiece of bills, but they kind of were here because these are the studies that are going to move us all towards 2023, which is the year when we're all going to be advocating for significant state investment in order to truly transform the childcare system. So those two studies were first a systems analysis, and that's looking at the long-term governance of our system and stakeholder voices and the accountability components of the system. That analysis is underway. Building Bright Futures is leading that work, and they hired two national consulting groups that are working together to lead that systems analysis. I expect many of you have heard about this. Hopefully you've been tuning in to some of the reports that are going out right now, the meetings that are happening to update folks on where that work is at. So, and Building Bright Futures has lots more information about that. So that systems analysis is underway and is due back to the legislature by July 1st. And then there's also a financing study that is included in the in H171, and that work will be led by the Joint Fiscal Office. And that is going to look at these great goals that we've set, this vision that we've established for ourselves for 2023. How much is that going to cost? So what are the costs? What's the cost estimate of all of that work? And what are the possible financing options for the state to truly make the dedicated investment that we know is necessary? So that study is due back on, a preliminary report is due back in December of this year and the final report in January. So the Joint Fiscal Office will be moving forward soon on that. So that's our update on what is happening now with the bill that you all helped us to pass last year. And I think now I'm going to turn it over to Drake, right, to talk more about our legislative agenda, building on that for this year.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Jen, can we move to the next slide? And hi, everyone. For those of you I haven't met before, my name's Drake Turner, and I'm the Senior Policy Manager at Let's for Kids. It's great to see such a big group here this morning. So we gave you a lot of context here, and that's really important because our legislative agenda in 2022 is really building off of the work that we started together last year with H171 and the childcare bill. So I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the first part of our legislative agenda this year, and then Janet's going to talk about the second part. So the first big bucket of our work this year is really focused on continuing to make progress on long-term transformation in our childcare system. As Sarah really thoroughly went over, H171 has really laid the foundation for this work. And there are some pieces of the work that are ongoing now. There are some studies that are moving forward, which will give us information next year that we can act on. But there are some really important things for us to make progress on this year to keep us on track to really achieving childcare transformation. So the first piece of that is to ensure that the childcare financing study moves forward. So Sarah mentioned that's one of those two studies that was passed as part of H171 and Act 45. The systems analysis was funded last year, but the financing study was not. And that was done strategically by the legislature. The systems analysis was meant to go first, and the financing study was meant to start later, sort of build off of the work identified through the systems analysis. So one of our first priorities this year was just ensure that there was adequate funding to support that study. And I have a little asterisk here because that is moving forward as we really were hoping. So the Budget Adjustment Act that was recently passed by the legislature just, I think the other day, I think it was just yesterday that the House finally did the last step in that process. It includes language that gives the Joint Fiscal Office the authority to move forward with finding a contractor to execute the financing study. So we're really excited about that. And next, the Budget Adjustment Act will go to the governor for his signature or not. And we'll just be really closely monitoring that. But we're really excited to see that work moving forward because we know that that financing study is really key to the work ahead to really determine what it will take to fund the system that we know Vermont needs. So we're really excited about that. We also are working this year to create in statute a childcare capacity development program. And this is really solidifying work that is already happening in Vermont and that has happened for years. The legislature has appropriated funding to support capacity development in our childcare system for years. And what we're really working to ensure happens this year is we want to make sure that we're building the infrastructure to create a strong business and capacity development program in Vermont to provide long-term support for childcare programs of all types. So center-based programs, home providers, nonprofit, for-profit. We want to make sure that childcare programs in Vermont are supported to start up, expand, and stay viable. So we're working on those pieces. That's work that right now is happening in the House Commerce and Economic Development Committee. But we know that we're only halfway through the session, so there's more work to do to make sure that continues to move forward. And then we're also committed to continuing to make progress on affordability through the Child Care Financial Assistance Program. Last year was really exciting. There was some investment through H171, but we know childcare is still not affordable for the majority of Vermont families. And the governor's proposed budget this year, there is around $4.9 million of investments in the Child Care Financial Assistance Program. There's also a proposal to expand the number of school-age providers in CCFAP, so we're really supportive of both of those proposals and are tracking them as we move through the budget process, which is currently in the House, and we'll move on to the Senate after crossover. And then really what kind of encompasses all of this work is we're really hyper-focused on doing our part to ensure the continued successful implementation of H171. And that's really done in partnership with folks at the state, folks in the legislature, the different partners that are really involved, and all of you to make sure that program, to make sure that the bill continues to be implemented successfully and that folks are getting what they need in a timely manner. So the other thing I should have said when I started is we will have a little bit of time for questions. So I'm not going to look at what's in the chat now, but I do want to give Janet a opportunity to talk about the second part of our legislative agenda, which is really focused on supporting early childhood educators right now in this really difficult moment. So Janet, I'll leave it to you.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Janet McLaughlin, Executive Director of the Vermont Association for the Education of Young Children, coming up on 1 year in this role, and have really loved the chance to work more closely with early childhood educators in this new way. Am glad to have this opportunity to tell you about the emergency investments in the early childhood education workforce that are being prioritized in our legislative agenda, and that which is a result of hearing and working directly with members of the workforce to identify what are the most important investments and what are the priorities to help us address the hiring crisis that I know that you guys are facing every single day, and that Sarah sort of outlined in the initial and sharing the initial statistics. We know that we are, as a collective, wanting to ensure that we are creating communities that support all of our young children and families. And when it comes to early childhood education, early childhood educators are truly the foundation of that system. So we need to make sure that we are moving forward and not going backwards in terms of creating a diverse, dynamic, well-prepared, well-compensated early childhood education workforce. So in terms of the specific asks this legislative session, the first is around establishing and funding an early childhood education recruitment campaign. The pitch for the legislature is that ideally that would be located at Vermont ECDL. We're running several other workforce development programs, and our observation right now is that both the regional efforts, the individual early childhood education programs that are trying to do recruitment, all of that is happening a little bit more could be better resourced and better coordinated so that people weren't spending time, so that people have the resources that they need to be able to go out and do outreach right away, and that we can leverage some of the state channels that we have to be able to, educate people about what what a rewarding career early childhood education can be, how to advance in their professional preparation, and really support folks in finding their way into this career and finding their way directly into early childhood education programs to do the work that we know is needed and is so important for our kids and families and communities. So that's one piece of it. The next piece is around issuing retention bonuses for early childhood educators currently in the field. So this is actually included in the Budget Adjustment Act that Sarah and Drake mentioned. So we are where that stands right now, right, is we're waiting to see what the governor does with that. So it's $6 million though for early childhood, for those who work in early childhood education programs, and which is a pretty significant investment. And it is, I think, a real testimony to your advocacy that it got put into the Budget Act right now and was supported by both the House and the Senate. So that is hopefully in the, it's very much in the works, and hopefully will be passed with no problems whatsoever and make it into law. The next piece is around premium assistance for early childhood educators related to health insurance. So that is, looking at some models in some other states where they've provided some dedicated premium assistance for early childhood educators. And that's another piece of what we're requesting. The fourth item on this list, and sorry, I know I'm kind of running through things really quickly, is for the student loan repayment program that was created last year. Many of you know that program design was focused on recruiting those folks who have recently earned a degree in early childhood education or related fields to actually use their degree and work within early childhood education programs. It's for folks, right, who've earned their degree within the last 5 years. Our proposal asked for that to be expanded to folks who've earned those degrees within the last 20 years, recognizing that this initial program is an excellent start, but there to truly address our recruiting and retention needs, it needs to be bigger. It doesn't meet all of the needs of the early childhood education workforce. And then finally, no cost childcare for early childhood educators, recognizing that this is one of the the biggest barriers, one of the top reasons that women in general leave their jobs, and specifically why people leave their roles in early childhood education programs. And it seems like that would be a clear and sort of obvious investment for that we heard from you all. Could really make the difference in people making the choice to stick with early childhood education as their career. So those are the specific asks around the workforce in the agenda. So I think I hand it over to Jen Horwitz with Let's Grow Kids.
Thanks, Janet. For those who don't know, I'm Jen Horwitz. I'm the Policy and Research Director for Let's Grow Kids. And so this is our time to do question answers. Before we dive into questions, though, I will kind of preview what's next, since there have been a few questions in the chat about that. So what we're going to do is take a few moments to talk through any of the content that Sarah, Drake, and Janet have discussed so far. Then we're going to be moving into smaller breakout groups where we're going to have a worksheet, and I'll show you all how to get to that resource. It's on Whova, and you can download it, and we're going to be working through it. So it actually includes sample talking points, a little bit more detail about all of these main issues we've been discussing so far. It has a worksheet where you can really start to build out what you want to share with legislators during your lunch conversations today. So that resource is going to give you many of the talking points that Drake, Sarah, and Janet have already shared. So that's like our really good starting point, since you won't have the PowerPoint presentation or Sarah, Drake, or Janet with you in those conversations. So now is the time to kind of get a little bit more clarity before we move into those smaller group conversations. I will say too, when we move into our breakout groups, you're going to have a chance to practice. So you'll have your worksheet where you can put in your information. And then also we're going to be working with one another to strengthen our talking points for our conversations with legislators as well. So there were some good questions that were in the chat so far about capacity development work. If you have any additional questions, I think Sarah has dropped in a lot of really good information there. But if you have some additional questions, feel free to put those in the chat as well. And I'm going to ask Anna if you can help me monitor if anyone raises their hand, since I have a PowerPoint and many other things going on both of my screens right now. I can't quite see everyone who might have their hands raised. So I can see the chat, and Anna, if you can help me with raised hands, that would be great. Does anyone have any questions about either H171, Act 45 that we've already talked about, or current legislative asks that Drake and Janet discuss?
And I'll just chime in to say that bad feedback. That I just put a link in the chat to our legislative agenda for this year. And yeah, so why don't I, because there seems to be a lot of questions about the capacity building component, I'll just say this is basically what I put in the chat. But so Let's Grow Kids has been doing a lot of capacity building work in partnership with the state and several other organizations as well over the past, I guess it's 5 or 6 years now. And the state allocates funding for childcare capacity building every year. And so we have been, we've applied for the RFP and partnered with with CDD to do that work over the past several years. We are going away in 2025, and that component of Let's Grow Kids work is phasing out over the next couple of years. So as we've looked to and talked to many of our partners in that work about what's needed going forward, it became clear that we need to have something to outlive that. There will always be a need to continue to build capacity in childcare, and there will always be a need to support the sort of the business components of running a childcare program in Vermont. And so we've been in conversation with lots of our partners in the state and also our national partners at First Children's Finance, who go into states and support this kind of work. And they advised that we should put something in statute. So there's a bill, H176, that would put in some statutory language to just keep that work moving forward. It essentially just authorizes the Child Development Division to partner with nonprofits to do grant making and loan financing and business development support for childcare programs. So that's the short answer. And I put a link to the bill in the chat. And there's just a little blurb about it in our legislative agenda. That's the last link that I just shared too. So if you wanted to be able to say something, we definitely don't want to get deep in the weeds with legislators about this stuff because they get really lost really quickly. But if you wanted to say something about how important it is to keep building childcare capacity, and that there is a bill that would accomplish that they should be looking to, that would be a fine thing to say, legislators, and there's a little bit of language in the legislative agenda that speaks to that.
There was a question in the chat about some of the stats we shared earlier. And so just referencing, NAEYC has been, the National Association for the Education of Young Children, has been doing surveys throughout the pandemic to really find out how regulated childcare programs are faring through everything. So there was a really good information sheet on Vermont specific results from that. And so that's where some of that information came from, as well as some other really great sources. Any other questions before we move into breakout groups?
I have a quick question. This is Sue White.
Go ahead, Sue.
I'm lost in all of the screens as well, so I couldn't find the hand raise piece. Anyways, just wondering if the ARPA funding piece is any part of conversations today, and how does that dovetail? There are just so many moving parts, and just a little bit of insight around that, and maybe that's for next steps.
You want me to take that, Jen?
Yes, Sarah,
Okay.
do you want to take that?
I was waiting to be called on, and I was like, I can just talk. So it's a great question, Sue. So the American Rescue Plan Act funding that has come into Vermont, you'll recall that there was $47 million, I think, set aside specifically for childcare. And the Child Development Division has allocated that funding, and the legislative members agreed with their priorities for that funding. And so that funding is supporting the workforce stabilization pieces from H171, so the scholarships and loan repayment program, It's also, there's $29 million that's flowing out the field right now through those childcare stabilization grants that are happening. And then there are some other pieces, some capacity building and other things that CDD has proposed to use that funding for. That'll be moving forward over the next couple of years. The Budget Adjustment Act that that Drake was talking about earlier, I think. Oh no, Janet was, with the retention bonuses. That is actually being funded through American Rescue Plan Act funds, not the childcare specific funds, but some of those, the bigger pot of ARPA dollars that are available to the state. There is very fierce competition, even though there are a lot of those dollars, they're being put toward really big like infrastructure projects. So the fact that they've allocated $6 million for workforce retention bonuses for childcare is great. And as folks have said, is a real testament to all of your advocacy that they included that in the Budget Adjustment Act. I will say the latest information as of last night is that the governor has indicated that he probably will sign the Budget Adjustment Act. His spokesperson said that although he doesn't agree with everything that's in there, he's not sure it's vetoed. It will be a veto for him. So, but we'll know more soon about that.